2 years after my son's death, I saw a little homeless boy who was his spitting image. When I got closer, the boy said, "Dad, we're rich now, 'cause I died." I could only cry. It was my son, the one I thought was dead. Before I continue the story, please help this channel grow by leaving a like, subscribing, and commenting where you're listening from. If you've done that, I'll begin. It had been 2 years since Leo was gone, but time seemed frozen in place. Every morning I'd wake up with the sensation of falling from a great height thrown back into a reality that would never feel like home. There were still 2 bedrooms in this house, but only one occupant. The other room remained hermetically sealed. I didn't dare touch it except every couple of weeks to dust the shelf of model cars just to make sure the world hadn't completely forgotten him. My husband David had reverted to the man he was before we had our son polished, busy, cold, and somehow more prosperous. He'd leave the house before dawn and return just as I was exhausted from my daily battle with loneliness. Whenever I asked why he was late, his answer was always light, weightless. "Client dinners, Sarah. The work never stops." There was no emotional exchange, no shadow of Leo reflected in his eyes. It was as if the event from 2 years ago hadn't been the loss of a child, but a minor fender bender he could easily leave behind. My mother-in-law Helen was even worse. "Sarah, you have to open your heart again," she'd told me several times. It was his time. "Don't keep holding on. It's hard for your husband to see you like this." I never answered. It was exhausting to defend my grief against people who wanted to bury it as quickly as they'd buried my son. That night, a drizzle started around dinner time. The office was damp and smelled of paper. I left later than usual because of a meeting that dragged on, and the drive home felt long without my little boy's voice, which used to demand we play the pop station on the radio. The wet streets reflected the storefront lights like tiny shards of glass glittering in the dark. As I slowed the car at a traffic light near the interstate overpass, I witnessed a scene that stopped my heart. A small boy was standing at the edge of the curb. He was thin. His clothes were ragged, and he was clutching the hem of his t-shirt with both hands, the same habit Leo had when he was nervous. His hair was messy and his face was smudged with dirt, but the shape of his eyes, the way he squinted slightly against the raindrops, the soft line of his chin, it was identical. Too identical. I slowly rolled down the window and inched forward. Incredibly, the boy tilted his head, but a moment later he turned his face toward me. The look shot through the center of my body. It was as if the past had come back to life and was staring at me from the wrong body. That little face wasn't just a resemblance. There was something in it that recognized me, that understood me, as if the 2 lost years had never existed. The light was about to turn green. A car horn blared behind me, startling me. The boy blinked once slowly like a signal I couldn't understand. I wanted to get out. I wanted to ask. I wanted to confirm I wasn't hallucinating from 2 years of festering grief. But the horn insisted the light changed and my body automatically pressed the accelerator. The car moved forward slowly, passing the boy, but my head stayed in the same place. In our last shared glance, the boy looked at me with something no street kid should have, the same deep look Leo had when he'd asked to sleep beside me when he had a fever. The rain intensified all the way home, and the windshield wipers swished frantically, but my vision remained blurred. My throat felt choked by something that wouldn't come out. Hope or fear, I didn't know. I only understood one thing that was not the look of a stranger. Something in the back of my memory was pushing, urging, screaming to be released. When I got home, David was asleep on the couch. Financial news was droning on the TV, and the remains of a takeout container sat on the coffee table. I didn't say anything. If I told him I saw a boy identical to Leo, he'd look at me as if I were crazy. He would say I was unstable again, that my grief was causing visions. He would repeat those words in a monotone, making me feel like a defective object. I went to Leo's room. I touched the doorknob. I didn't intend to go in. I just stood before the door that hadn't been opened in so long. Behind that wooden door, the little world I had created for him was still preserved: toy cars, storybooks, a stuffed bear he had named himself. I pictured Leo's face and remembered the face of that homeless boy. The 2 faces overlapped in my mind, becoming difficult to distinguish. As the night deepened, I finally sat before the small memorial corner where Leo's picture was. It was him at 4, smiling with a missing baby tooth. The small candle beside it was half melted. I took a deep breath. My chest was tight. "If you were still alive," I whispered, my voice trembling, "your face would look exactly like that now. Your hair a little longer, and you'd still have that habit of grabbing your shirt when you're nervous." The silence wrapped around the room like a dark wave. I covered my face with my hands. The tip of my nose burned and my breathing was shallow. There was another voice in my head, a voice that hadn't left me since that stoplight. What did you just see? It can't be. It's a coincidence. I lifted my head and looked at Leo's photo one more time. His eyes in the picture seemed to look at me with tenderness and warmth, like when he'd ask me to hold him because he was scared of the dark. If it's really you, I whispered almost inaudibly, give me a sign so your mom knows how to save you. Please give me a sign. Outside, the wind picked up and rattled the window. The lamp in the room flickered once as if about to go out, and when the candle at the memorial suddenly wavered and extinguished for no reason, my skin broke out in goosebumps. Something had changed that night, something subtle, faint, but unmistakable. Something that made my heart pound like someone waiting on the threshold of darkness for an arrival. I didn't know if it was hope or danger. I only knew one thing: this wasn't over. It had never been over. From that night on, my mind never found peace again. Every moment felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. One small misstep and I would fall. The shadow of the little boy's face followed me everywhere. It seeped through the cracks, stuck to the window when I looked out, and crept into my dreams, waking me up breathless. David didn't notice anything, only asking why I looked paler than usual. I answered lightly, just not sleeping well. That was enough for him. He hadn't truly looked at me in the last 2 years, just as I hadn't looked at him. Sometimes I wondered if we were still a married couple, or just two strangers sharing an address. That afternoon, I intentionally took a longer route home from work. I drove down the same road as the night before. My heart was beating too fast, too loud, feeling like it would break out of my chest. I stopped at the same spot as yesterday, the traffic light near the overpass. The rain today wasn't heavy, just a mist-like drizzle. And there on the corner of the sidewalk, the boy was standing again. His posture was the same, gripping the hem of his t-shirt and shaking it slightly, a habit Leo only had when he was nervous or cold. I rolled down the window a crack. My chest grew warm. The world shrank, focusing only on that child. This time, a green light wasn't going to make me leave. As soon as the light turned yellow, I pulled the car over to the side of the road and got out. My steps trembled as I approached him. The boy stiffened immediately, as if trained to flee from an approaching stranger. But when the distance between us narrowed to 2 steps, he suddenly froze. His eyes widened and locked on me, as if I were someone he knew, or someone he was supposed to have known. My voice was trapped. Hey, sweetie. Can I ask you something? He didn't come closer, nor did he run. I slowly knelt, trying to match his height. He smelled of rainwater, wet earth, and the sweat of a child who had spent too much time on the street. My hands shook. I wanted to touch him, but I held back. There was something on his face. The line of his eyebrows, the shape of his nose, the angle of his mouth, it squeezed my heart. The small scar above his right eyebrow, the same little scar Leo had gotten from bumping into the coffee table in the living room. A lump formed in my throat. Honey, what's your name? The boy slowly parted his lips. His voice was tiny, almost a whisper. Ma'am, Dad's rich now 'cause I died. The world collapsed around me. The traffic faded. The sound of motorcycles ceased. The wind stopped. The sentence felt like a direct stab to my chest. A hot liquid blurred my vision uncontrollably. I covered my mouth to keep from sobbing, but my body trembled uncontrollably. The boy seemed to regret what he said. He quickly covered his mouth with the back of his hand, a gesture far too adult for such a small child. His eyes darted anxiously from left to right as if looking for someone he feared. Sweetie, my voice broke. Who told you that? He didn't answer and took half a step back. From a distance, an adult man's voice, harsh and fierce, called out. Nico, get over here. Don't wander off. The boy flinched hard, his shoulders tensing and his breathing quickening. He looked at me for a moment. That look filled with a fear so deep I wanted to immediately snatch him up and carry him away from whoever had broken him. But before he ran to follow the man's voice, he took half a step toward me, close enough to whisper near my ear. Ma'am, don't tell Dad you saw me, okay? Or he'll punish me. I jolted as if slapped by something invisible. Dad. That word hit my heart harder than anything in the last 2 years. Not a guardian, not a mister, not a brother, but Dad. My body swayed. Nico, who is your dad? I forced the question out in a nearly extinct voice. But the man from before had already approached and grabbed the boy's arm roughly. I told you not to wander off. Let's get to work. The boy hung his head. He seemed used to being dragged like this. But before his small body was pulled away completely, he looked back at me. The same look Leo had when he was afraid of being left alone in another room. I wanted to chase them, to scream to stop that man, but my feet were nailed to the ground. I was choking my body, frozen my mind in chaos. Everything I thought I had buried 2 years ago suddenly resurfaced, vomiting up the wounds I had forcibly suppressed. I returned to the car with trembling hands. I drove halfway home, then pulled over. I turned off the engine and wept in silence. I got home much later. The house was dark with only a dim light on in the living room. David wasn't back yet. I went to Leo's memorial corner. I sat on the floor, my body still shaking. I stared at the photo for a long time as if searching for an answer from those little eyes that once looked at me without fear. If it's really you, my voice cracked, Mom will find you. Mom will bring you home. Silence. But in that silence, I felt something different from the night before. It wasn't grief or despair. For the first time in 2 years, there was something small, faint, but stirring in my chest. It wasn't hope. It was something sharper. Doubt. And within that doubt was a question that made me tremble all over. If that boy called someone Dad, who on earth was he talking about? After that incident, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, the boy's words slammed into my mind. Dad, we're rich now. 'Cause I died, ma'am. How could a street kid know the words rich and died in such a complex sentence? And how could he have said it to me as if I were part of that story? The next morning I sat in the kitchen for a long time, staring at a cup of tea I never touched. David was getting ready for work, knotting his tie in the living room. I quietly watched his silence, his methodical movements, how he tied his tie without looking in the mirror as if he had memorized the contours of his own face. After Leo's death, I had barely observed David. I was lost in grief and he was busy living life, fixing the business, taking care of everything I had let go of because I was too broken. But looking at his back today, I felt an invisible hand tightening around my throat. I remembered Leo's last night in the hospital. The memory came unbidden, playing out like a film I couldn't stop. It all started with a high fever. I still remember Leo shivering in my lap that night, his body burning like a little ball of fire. I was desperate to take him to our usual hospital, but David insisted on going to another one that supposedly had better facilities. I know a doctor there, Sarah. They'll get it sorted out quickly, he said. I didn't think it was strange. When your child is sick, you tend to follow the person who seems most certain, and David seemed so certain that night. The hospital looked clean and orderly, but the atmosphere was strangely cold. The lights were too white, the hallways too quiet. Dr. Evans, who was in charge of Leo, approached with a deadpan face, professional but reserved. That was the only word I could use for him. Reserved. We'll put him on an IV and an antipyretic. Complications can progress quickly if left untreated, he said. I remember wanting to move Leo to another hospital when his fever wouldn't break. David, let's just go to our regular hospital, please. But David gripped my shoulder, his voice firm. We shouldn't move him. He said the treatment has already started. Moving him would only put him in danger. And Dr. Evans nodded, as if fully supporting David. There was a little tremor in my stomach at that moment, but I ignored it. I just wanted my son to get well. That last night I was exhausted, sitting in a chair holding Leo's small hand. He was semi-conscious, sometimes opening his eyes and then closing them again. A conversation I had ignored before now stabbed me like a cold knife. Leo had whispered to the nurse, his voice hoarse, barely audible. If Leo sleeps for a long time, Dad can pay off all his debts. The nurse had looked at me startled, but as soon as she saw David, she quickly looked down as if she wasn't supposed to react. At the time, I thought Leo was delirious. But now that sentence combined with the homeless boy's words from yesterday morphing into something terrible. Dad, we're rich now 'cause I died. Dad. 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 The words linked themselves together without my having to arrange them. I remember dozing off for a moment in that hospital chair. When I opened my eyes, it was all over. Dr. Evans was standing at the foot of the bed, looking at me with an almost empty expression. David came over and held me tightly. Sarah, Leo's gone, he said. I remember screaming and shaking Leo's small, already still body. I begged them to let me see his face longer, but the doctor refused. I'm sorry, ma'am. Per protocol, we need to seal the casket quickly. There are bodily fluids. It's not good to leave it open for long. Bodily fluids, he said. I remember David rushing the funeral. He handled everything. I didn't sign anything. I was too shattered to notice. And now it was clearer. David and the doctor were always in the same space. One voice, one rhythm, one decision except for one thing. My decision. I decided nothing about Leo's death. Everything was done for me. The memory threw me back into the kitchen. I realized I was out of breath. as if I had run a long distance. David, who was putting on his shoes, glanced at me. "Sarah, what's wrong? Why are you so pale?" I shook my head. "Nothing." He stood up and straightened his shirt. "If you think about Leo too often, it'll be harder for you to recover. You have to know how to separate reality from your thoughts." That voice, the same voice from 2 years ago, the voice that made me feel small and fragile. But now that voice made me realize. David wasn't just indifferent. David was afraid I would start asking questions. He stared at me for a long time as if assessing whether my mind was clear or if I was a danger to him. And for the first time I saw something in his eyes, something I had never seen when we were still a complete family watchfulness. He said goodbye and closed the door, but before the door shut completely, I heard through the crack a brief phone conversation. "Yeah, she's getting weird again. But don't worry. As long as she stays like this, she's safe." Safe from what? The door clicked shut. My body trembled. Small memories I had previously dismissed now returned like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. And as everything began to connect, there was only one question that drove into my mind like a nail. If I had really lost Leo that night, why wasn't I allowed to see him longer? More importantly, what the hell happened while I was asleep? The question grew in my head, drowning out all other sounds, leaving only a single conclusion, terrifying but now undeniable. Leo's death was too neat, too fast, too opportune to be called fate. From that morning on, my thoughts could no longer be calmed. Every word from the homeless boy, every memory of Leo's last night in the hospital, and every small detail about David suddenly began to intertwine like a ball of yarn that had suddenly found a hidden pattern. It was as if a giant hand had been holding my head underwater, and for the first time in 2 years, I had broken the surface, gasping for air. David came home late that night. A faint scent of expensive cologne he never used to wear floated weakly from his body. He seemed tired, but not the tiredness of someone who has worked hard, more like the tiredness of having to guard too many things too tightly. "Meeting with a client," he said, setting down his briefcase. "Work was a lot today." I didn't answer. I watched him arrange his documents, his new watch, his new shoes, the new phone in his hand. Over these 2 years, many new things had appeared in our lives, things too expensive for the state of David's business before. But whenever I asked, the answer was always the same. "It's because the project went well, Sarah." What was this project that went so well? Coming immediately after Leo's death. While he was in the shower, I opened his drawer. There were several bank envelopes and transaction statements, with sums that made no sense. I didn't touch them. I just saw that the amount was too large to be the result of David's business, which was on the verge of bankruptcy 2 years ago. One envelope was slightly bent and sticking out. Through that small opening, I saw a number that immediately made my hands and knees weak. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, exactly the amount David needed to pay off his debts from before. I heard the sound of the bathroom door opening and quickly closed the drawer. For the first time in a long time, I felt fear. Not fear of David, but fear of the possibility that everything I had thought was fate might have been a plan. Several days later, I went to the bank to manage my company's financial reports. The VIP customer service employee greeted me. She smiled kindly and said words that froze my body. "Mrs. Miller, how are you doing now? I hope you're more settled. I was so sorry to hear about your son back then." I was the one who processed the insurance payout. "Again, I'm so sorry for your loss." I stood there stunned. The office noise suddenly disappeared. "I'm sorry." "What insurance?" My voice was stuck. The employee tilted her head and searched her files. "A life and medical insurance policy in your son's name. The payout was quite large. Your husband handled all the paperwork. The policy was taken out about a year before your son's death. A year before. That meant David had taken out that insurance without my knowledge. Back when our financial situation was bad, David always said we couldn't even afford the insurance premium for himself. I stood motionless, and the world shrank again. "Who paid the premiums?" I asked in a trembling voice. "Your husband, the policyholder. He was also the primary beneficiary." Then the employee added in a cautious, apologetic tone, "That insurance payout was so large, it must have helped the family finances. Family finances, paying off debts, remodeling his parents' house, a new car for his brother. The luck of a project, or the luck of a death." I returned home with cold hands and a head that was still buzzing. When David came back that night, I gathered the courage to ask in a soft tone, as if I just wanted trivial confirmation. "David, did we have insurance for Leo?" He stopped at the threshold of the kitchen. His gaze shifted for a moment fast but noticeably. "Where did you hear that?" I swallowed. "At the bank." He laughed briefly, a laugh that concealed something. "Oh, Sarah, that's just basic health insurance. I didn't tell you because I thought you didn't have the strength to look at paperwork at that time. I took care of everything. Why didn't you tell me?" My voice was soft, but inside I was shaking. David came closer and looked down at me. "What's wrong with you? I thought you were getting better, but here we go again. You have to know you're not recovered yet." I fell silent. David looked at me like a patient in a delirium. "If you keep talking like this, people might misunderstand. Don't make me look like a man with an unstable wife." That word, unstable. The same word he told Dr. Evans 2 years ago. He also told that word to his mother. He told it to my family, as if he wanted to build a narrative about me. Gaslighting, erasing traces, controlling the narrative. It was all too familiar, too neat. David went into the bedroom and closed the door. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the empty floor, realizing something I had ignored until now. David wasn't just dishonest. David was hiding too much. And every time I got close to the truth, he chose the safest way out, making me look crazy. That night, I took out my phone and opened an old contact. Attorney Davis, the family lawyer who had been very close to my late father. My hand trembled as I dialed. After several rings, a firm voice answered. "Yes, Sarah." I looked at the floor, trying to contain the tremor in my chest. "Miss Davis, I need help." Attorney Davis's voice immediately became serious. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath. Then I said in a low voice like a confession I had tried to bury for 2 years, "Miss Davis, I think Leo didn't really die." There was a brief silence on the other end of the phone, and then Attorney Davis's voice came back very low, very cautious, but also very certain. "Meet me tomorrow. And whatever happens, don't say a word to anyone." I hung up the phone with cold hands. Outside, the wind gently stirred the curtains. The house felt different, as if all the walls harbored a secret I hadn't seen until now. And for the first time, I felt something moving under the surface of my life, something that had been waiting patiently to be discovered, something that demanded to be opened. Because the truth always finds a crack like red fluid trying to seep from a closed wound. And that night I knew I had just opened the first crack. The meeting with Attorney Davis was in her office filled with filing cabinets and documents. The smell of old paper and fresh coffee filled the room, evoking a faint memory of my father, the man who had trusted her completely. Sitting across from her for the first time in 2 years, I felt I wasn't alone. "Tell me from the beginning," she said, soft but firm. I held nothing back. I told her everything. The homeless boy, the way he looked at me. The sentence, "Dad, we're rich now, 'cause I died." From the scar on his eyebrow, to the insurance for Leo that I found by accident. My voice broke several times, but Attorney Davis didn't interrupt, just took meticulous notes. When I finished talking, she opened a file she had already prepared as if she knew I would come one day. "For the past 2 years, she said in a low voice, "I've been keeping an eye on one thing. That hospital where Leo was declared dead." My heart pounded. She pulled out a copy of the insurance policy. "That's not your signature. It's a forgery. It was suspicious from the start," she said. "Before your father passed, he asked me to keep an eye on things from a distance. If anything strange happened to the family after he was gone." I felt a sharp pain in my chest, my tongue frozen by the memory of my dad. Attorney Davis continued. "The insurance payout for Leo was dispersed in an abnormally fast time. Unusually, most of it immediately went to your husband's and his parents' accounts." I couldn't breathe for a moment. "David said it was because the project went well," I murmured weakly. Attorney Davis looked at me for a long time. "Sarah, what kind of project payment is dispersed days after a child's death?" I was silent. The world felt like it was crumbling under my feet. "That's not all. There's another report." Attorney Davis pushed another document forward. "At that hospital over the last 2 years, there have been several cases of children who died suddenly. And several weeks or months later, new homeless children with very similar features appeared." I froze, as if she were saying, "The death was just a record, not a reality." The sound of the air conditioning in the room felt too loud. My ears were ringing. I wasn't the only one who felt something was wrong. There was a pattern, there were traces, and behind it all was a dark structure. Attorney Davis picked up her phone. "I'd like you to meet someone." A moment later, the door opened, and a man in a plain suit walked in. His face was vaguely familiar, a firm build, sharp but not threatening eyes. "This is Detective Miller," Attorney Davis said. "Your father helped his family years ago. He's a man who has a debt to pay. Detective Miller sat in the chair next to me. I've heard part of the story and I have strong suspicions this organization is not small. The hospital is just one of the entry points. I swallowed. Detective Miller showed me several surveillance photos he had taken of homeless children. One blurry photo crushed my heart like a large rock. It was the homeless boy. Ragged clothes, dirty face. But it was him. This boy, my voice nearly died. We call him Nico, Detective Miller said. He has inconsistencies about his origins. He said he lived in a place that smelled of medicine, a place that was all white. It could be a hospital. I trembled. And one more thing, Detective Miller looked at me seriously. He has mentioned a name. Lee. Not Leo. But it was enough to suspect the boy's identity might have been changed. The room seemed to spin. Attorney Davis said, "If it's really Leo, we can't make a wrong move. These people erase traces quickly. If they suspect we know they might move the child elsewhere. What should I do then?" My voice broke. "You need to approach the boy again," Detective Miller answered. "But very cautiously. We'll watch you from a distance and find out who's controlling him." My life suddenly felt like a dark chessboard. Every move had to be precise. One mistake would ruin everything. I took a deep breath. If it's really Leo, I don't care how big the organization is. I will bring him back. Attorney Davis looked at me deeply. There was something in her eyes, a mix of compassion, admiration, and concern. "We will be with you. But Sarah, you have to be prepared to face a reality that might be very painful." I nodded, though my body was shaking. "If they ask the boy to fake his death," Detective Miller continued, "that means these people have total control over his life. We need to find out who the person he calls Dad is." That word Dad stabbed me again. Who's Dad, David? Another man? Or someone who runs this dark organization? I closed my eyes, trying to catch my breath. The world I had only looked at from a distance was beginning to reveal its darkness. There was a hospital, there was a foundation, there were missing children, there was money flowing, there was a forged signature. And at the center of it all, Leo or Nico or whoever he was forced to become someone else. Detective Miller leaned slightly toward me. "We start tonight. Go back to that traffic light. We'll follow you from a distance." I nodded. Fear and determination collided in my chest. Because for the first time, I felt my steps were heading straight into the center of the secret that was hiding behind the tragedy I had only thought was fate. But now I knew. Fate is never this clean, this neat, this silent. There was a hand that manipulated it, and tonight I would touch that hand for the first time. That night, the city seemed to hold its breath. The sky was overcast without rain, and the air was humid with the smell of freshly dried asphalt. The streetlights cast a pale yellow light, as if illuminating themselves. I drove slowly to the traffic light near the overpass, the place that had changed my entire life 2 weeks ago. Inside my jacket was a small hidden microphone that Attorney Davis had given me. "It's not exactly legal, but it's to protect you," she'd said. Detective Miller and 2 other members of his team were following several blocks behind, disguised as normal drivers. But even knowing someone was watching me, the step I had to take was still mine alone. I parked my car a little way from the original spot, so as not to be detected. The traffic light had just turned red when I got out. I pretended to buy a soda from a street vendor. My heart was pounding so hard it was a miracle others couldn't hear it. And there he was. The boy was sitting with his knees bent on the sidewalk, drawing something in the dirt with the end of a small stick. When I approached, he immediately straightened his body and hugged his knees as if preparing to flee. But his gaze caught mine. Those eyes I once looked into while feeding him soup now looked at me with a mixture of fear and a repressed longing. "Nico," I called him in a low voice. He bit his lip. A characteristic gesture of a nervous child. Leo's gesture. I knelt slowly, making sure not to make any sudden moves so he wouldn't run. "I just want to buy you some food. That's all. If you want." He was silent. Then he slowly stood up and nodded slightly, a movement more like a question than an answer. I smiled faintly, containing the earthquake in my chest. We walked to a small diner not far from the stoplight. Detective Miller was watching from a distance, pretending to buy cigarettes at the convenience store next door. At a booth in the diner, I ordered a grilled cheese and a bowl of tomato soup for him. He ate greedily but in an orderly way, like a child who had been taught manners before. I felt something break in my chest, a mixture of love, hurt, and fear. I tried to start a conversation. "Where do you live, Nico?" He was silent, looking at his plate. "I can't say. Who told you not to?" He bit his lower lip. The people. They'll punish me if I talk. I tried not to ask too quickly. Do you remember what your original name was before they called you Nico? He frowned, trying to remember. I only remember they called me Lee sometimes, and sometimes O, but I forgot the full name. The world seemed to stop for a moment. Leo. The voice in my head sounded like a war drum. I held my breath so as not to lose control. Who did you live with before I asked again cautiously? He looked up at me. His eyes were wet. I had a mommy before. I almost fainted. But he whispered, almost afraid to hear the answer. My mommy disappeared. I covered my mouth with the back of my hand to contain the sound that was about to explode. He continued in a low voice as if repeating something an adult had taught him. I'm not supposed to say I have a mommy. I have to say I'm an orphan. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted a sharp tang. Who said that? The boy lowered his head sharply. Dad. That word hit me again with destructive force. What dad? I couldn't stop myself from asking the question even though I knew it might make him shut down. He looked at me for a long, long time. It wasn't the look of a street kid. It was the look of someone who knew the pain of loss but didn't know how to express it. Dad said if I slept for a long time, he said in a low voice, like reading from a truncated memory, Dad could pay the debt. And then I woke up in a white place that smelled like medicine. My body trembled. You woke up in the hospital. My voice cracked. The boy nodded. But when I woke up, Dad wasn't there. The people said I was dead, so I had to be Nico. My hands covered my mouth, my shoulders shaking violently. He continued in a low voice, if I meet my real mommy, I'm not supposed to say because then Dad will get mad. There was a long silence between us. From a distance, Detective Miller was watching with a tense face. Suddenly, heavy footsteps approached. A man in a dark shirt appeared from the back of the diner, the same handler from before. His face was stiff, his jaw tight. His eyes looked at me with suspicion as he spoke to the boy. Nico, what are you doing? Get back. Let's go, he said in a harsh voice. The boy stiffened immediately, but before he got up, he leaned close to me and whispered quickly, very quickly, like someone who might not get another chance. Mommy, don't tell anyone, okay? I'm supposed to look dead. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The sentence felt like it was cutting my body from the inside. I'm supposed to look dead. The man roughly grabbed the boy's arm. Detective Miller stood up from a distance but didn't move immediately. He knew we shouldn't make the handler more suspicious tonight. I could only watch as the boy was led away. His small steps were so hesitant, but he looked back once. He looked at me with eyes full of an unspoken message. As soon as they disappeared around the corner, Detective Miller immediately entered the diner and sat across from me. His face was serious, his breathing shallow. Ma'am, he said in a low voice, I think there's a 90% chance that's Leo. I covered my face with my hands and cried silently. Detective Miller added, but if we rush this, they might move the boy again. We need to take down their organization all at once. We have to make them believe you don't know anything. I nodded, trembling. My heart was filled with pain, hope, and fear. Because that night, for the first time at the end of 2 years of darkness, I had seen the light. But that light was right in the middle of a nest of darkness. After that last encounter, sleep was no longer something I could enjoy. Every time I closed my eyes, the little face of Leo or Nico would appear in the darkness, calling to me in a faint voice. I'm supposed to look dead. The sentence not only tore a mother's heart apart, but it also opened the thin veil that had covered my life for 2 years. Today I was sitting in Detective Miller's office with him and Attorney Davis. The smell of strong coffee and damp paper filled the room. Detective Miller stood in front of a large board filled with photos, documents, and red lines connecting them. Let's start with the first door, Detective Miller said. The hospital. I held my breath. That word was enough to make my body shudder. Detective Miller placed a large binder on the table and slowly opened it. We found the same pattern of death as in Leo's case. He pointed to the photos of 3 children. Their faces were blurry, but their ages were similar to when Leo was gone. These children were recorded as having died suddenly. All were treated by Dr. Evans, and all the families received an insurance payout they didn't know about before. I gripped the chair so tightly my knuckles turned white. Attorney Davis continued, in the hospital's administration records, there are several records that have been deleted or more accurately forced to disappear. But we found an incomplete file that was kept manually. She put down a medical history with the date of Leo's death. I felt my body freeze. In the bottom corner was Dr. Evans's signature, and right next to it was David's signature. Detective Miller said in a low voice, This isn't common. A husband doesn't need to sign specific documents unless it's a patient transfer, a special claim, or an emergency consent decision. I stared at the document for a long time. David signed something on the day Leo was declared dead, but I didn't hear anything about it at all. Detective Miller pressed a button on the remote. The small TV screen in the room lit up. It showed a hospital CCTV recording that could only be accessed internally, a video he had obtained after much effort. The black and white video showed the hospital corridor 2 years ago. The timestamp read 4:07 a.m. Detective Miller paused the recording on one frame. I stared at the screen without breathing. There was David, walking quickly toward Dr. Evans's office with a brown file folder, hours after David had informed me that Leo had died. Why was he there? I whispered in a nearly extinct voice. No one answered, because the answer was too obvious and too horrible to say out loud. Detective Miller continued the recording. Several minutes later, a woman in a suit with an ID from the Children's Hope Foundation appeared. She entered the same room, and then the video showed 2 nurses pushing a small gurney covered with a blanket up to the head. I trembled violently. That's not a casket, is it? My breath hitched. It's not, Detective Miller said. It's not. In the video, the small gurney was moved to the side door of the hospital, not the morgue. No casket, no procedure, nothing was normal. The child on the gurney, covered with a blanket, was taken out like smuggled goods. Detective Miller turned off the screen. The room felt very small, as if the walls were slowly closing in on me. Attorney Davis said, Sarah, do you remember? Did you see Leo after he was declared dead? I searched my memories. The scenes were blurry. I remember fainting. I remember waking up when it was all over. I remember the closed casket. I remember David gripping my shoulder and saying, Don't look, you won't be able to handle it. My body began to shake. I never saw him really. I didn't see him for long, I whispered. I only caught a glimpse just before the casket was closed, and that strange feeling washed over me again, the feeling that something was wrong that night. Detective Miller handed me one last document, a photo of the insurance payout application that was dispersed days after Leo was gone. The signature section for the beneficiary looked very similar to my signature, but it wasn't mine. I covered my mouth with my hands. Tears fell silently. Attorney Davis took my hand. Sarah, this forged signature alone is enough to open a major case. But we need one last step. Audio proof. Detective Miller added, We need David to talk. And the only person who can make him talk is you. I lifted my head, my eyes red. He will never confess. We don't need him to confess everything, Detective Miller said. Your mission is to make him feel arrogant, to make him feel that you don't suspect anything, so he feels safe. Attorney Davis added, We're going to catch him with his own stupidity. I wiped my tears. What if he realizes I'm suspicious afterwards? He must not realize. Attorney Davis's voice was sharp. Detective Miller leaned in and looked at me deeply. Sarah, he said in a low voice, we are almost there. We have the hospital, the foundation, the flow of funds, the video recording. We're just missing one thing, the link between all of it. And that's your husband. And for that, you have to go back into the darkness you've been trying to leave. I nodded slowly. There was a fear that dominated my body, but behind it was a small flame that was beginning to burn. The flame that had been extinguished with Leo's death 2 years ago. Now that flame was growing inside me, burning me. If they dared to steal my son, I would destroy them one by one. Outside the office window, the afternoon wind was blowing. The outside world seemed to be going on as normal. Cars passed. Pedestrians crossed the street. No one knew that tonight a mother had just discovered the door to the truth that had been covered up by the person she trusted most. And that door I was ready to enter, even if what awaited me inside was a monster living in my own house. That night I came back from Attorney Davis's office and sat in the car for a long time. The streetlight reflected on the windshield, drawing thin lines on my face. My mind was boiling with fear, rage, and disgust at myself for having trusted David so much. Detective Miller and Attorney Davis had given me the hardest task to pretend to be a fragile wife, who didn't understand anything, who was just starting to accept reality. And in that unguarded state, we would induce David to let slip part of his secret. The strategy was simple but deadly: make him feel safe, make him talk. I entered the house with slow steps. David was sitting in the living room, scrolling on his phone and watching the news. He glanced at me and smiled slightly. "Where were you?" "It's pretty late," he said casually. I swallowed, burying all the CCTV videos, the forged signature, and the money trail deep in my heart. I had to appear empty. I just went for a walk. To get some fresh air, I answered in a low voice sitting next to him. He looked at me. Fresh air. Yeah, I said, forcing a smile. I'm tired of only thinking about Leo. I want to live a normal life now too. David's gaze changed. There was something in it, a very quick but clear relief, as if a burden on his shoulders had suddenly been lifted. That's a good thought, he said. You have to move on. I laughed, lightly forced. Yeah, I even thought we should move. There are too many memories of Leo here. David flinched for a fraction of a second. A fleeting moment, but it was enough. I continued feigning naivety. We could use the insurance money from Leo for the down payment on the new house, right? The room suddenly fell silent. David looked at me longer than usual. He slowly put down his phone. His expression shifted, because for the first time I had acknowledged something he thought I would never realize. You knew about that. His voice was low but sharp. I lowered my head, pretending to be uneasy. Yeah, I know you took care of it. I guess I was too sensitive at the time to want to hear about money. I just hoped Leo didn't go in vain. David leaned back in his chair. His face became slightly arrogant, as if his position had been elevated. Sarah, he said, letting out a long sigh. I did everything for us. You have to understand that. I didn't look at him. I let him talk. I used that money to pay off debts, to build the business for our future. Leo's death was, yes, an unfortunate fate, but I couldn't let everything else collapse too, could I? That's how an adult has to think. My heart lurched. He didn't flinch at mentioning using his son's death as fuel for his own life. But I had to keep acting. I understand, David, I whispered. I just want us to be happy again. I want to help. He took the bait. Exactly as Attorney Davis had predicted, David's pride was the weapon that could stab him. Good, he said with relief. You're finally being realistic. He leaned back comfortably, fiddling with his phone. You've been too sentimental all this time. If you keep this up, people will say you're unstable, especially if you say weird things about Leo. That phrase, again the same phrase he used 2 years ago to shut me up. Leo, I feigned confusion. What do you mean? David chuckled softly. Well, you're prone to saying things like you hear Leo's voice, or that Leo appears in your dreams. You were often strange, Sarah. That's why I had to handle everything back then. He continued, not realizing he was trapping himself. If I hadn't moved quickly, you'd be getting treated for being crazy right now. You were always on the verge of fainting back then. That's why I had to make quick decisions about the funeral, the documents, everything. Documents. The statement I needed most, to link David to that night. I lowered my head even further, playing the fragile, guilty wife. I'm sorry, David, if I made things difficult for you. Yes, now you're talking sense. He touched my shoulder. The same touch that once felt warm now made my skin want to flee from my bones. He continued in a condescending tone. Even if you wanted to process the insurance payout now, it's too late. It's all invested in the business. But don't worry, the returns are good. The returns are good. Returns on death on a forged signature on a son who was never buried. I felt my body tremble, but I had to hold on. I had to act until the end. David, I whispered softly, I just want you to be completely honest with me. We really used that money to pay off the debt, right? David looked at me, and in his gaze was something he was proud of, a small arrogance born of relief. He nodded weakly. Yes, and it's all taken care of. You have to accept it. Don't ask anymore. The small microphone in my jacket recorded every word clearly. A second later, David's phone buzzed. He saw the notification and smiled slightly. I have to go out for a moment. An important appointment. What appointment? I asked softly. Business matters. Not something you need to worry about. He grabbed the car keys and left without looking back. As soon as the door closed, I felt my legs go weak. I collapsed onto the sofa, covering my mouth with both hands. Behind the walls of my own house, that rot had been alive all this time, and I had been manipulated with all my grief and stupidity to never see it. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. A text from Attorney Davis. The recording is clear. We have what we need. A second message from Detective Miller followed. We've detected Nico's handler entering the Foundation's offices tonight. They're meeting. This is the chance. My hands trembled as I read the third message. Sarah, tomorrow we reveal everything. I closed my eyes. I was choking. David thought he was safe. David thought I had become a submissive wife again. David thought I had stopped asking questions, but I had just opened the door to the world he had locked, and I was going to enter all the way to the deepest room. because starting tonight, it was my turn to hunt them. From morning, my body felt like it was containing a storm that had not yet broken. Every step felt like the echo of 2 years of pain, 2 years of unanswered questions, and 2 years of being forced to believe my son was already dead. But today, the final curtain would be raised. Detective Miller picked me up in front of Attorney Davis's office. He handed me a vest to wear in the field. The vest made me nervous, but it also made me afraid of losing control. "If you see Leo first," he said cautiously, "don't run, don't scream. Wait for our signal." I nodded, though I knew if Leo was right in front of my eyes, I might not be able to contain myself. The sun was beginning to set when we arrived at the foundation building. From the outside, it looked like a normal social welfare office. The sign hung neatly, with a logo of hands wrapping around a small heart, a slogan about homeless children needing to be rescued. Ironically, this place was hiding a crime behind the name that was supposed to protect. Detective Miller's team was already in position. They were waiting for the signal of a fund transaction between the foundation, the child brokers, and the hospital staff. That was the signal that all the important figures were in one place. In the surveillance van, I watched the small screen showing the portable CCTV that Detective Miller had installed around the building. In one corner, the handler who had dragged Nico away before was now leading several children to the side door. And in the middle of that small group was a small body in oversized, faded clothes. His hair was longer than the last time I saw him, but I recognized the silhouette by the way he walked slow, cautious, as if ready to retreat at any moment if there was danger. "Leo." "My son." I held my breath until my chest ached. I pressed my knees until my knuckles turned white. "Ma'am, stay calm," Detective Miller reminded me, but his voice sounded distant. Leo was pushed into an inner room. The handler handed a thick envelope to a woman in a suit with the foundation's logo. They talked quickly. The voice from the listening device reached our van. "The documents for these 3 kids are ready to be sent from the hospital," the woman said. "And what about Leo's father?" the handler asked. "He got his cut." I trembled. The foundation, the hospital, David, they were all intertwined like a dark maze. The deal was about to close. Detective Miller gave a small nod. Now. In seconds, police cars approached from 3 directions. The team entered through the front side and back doors. Heavy footsteps filled the hallway. The woman in the suit turned around, startled. The other employees, too. The handler tried to flee through the side door but was caught by 2 officers. Shouts, crashing noises, and falling objects mixed into one. I got out of the van as soon as Detective Miller allowed it. My feet trembled as I entered that hallway, but I forced myself to keep going. I entered the room where several children were gathered. Their eyes were filled with panic, confusion, and fear, and in the middle of them was the little face that had filled me with a longing that hadn't faded every night for 2 years. Nico, or Leo, or both, or the child they stole from himself, was standing hugging his elbows. His body was stiff. The handler was gone, but the fear was still deeply ingrained. I called his name in a low voice. "Leo." He turned slowly. His eyes widened. There was something in them that immediately broke down all the walls of my heart. Wordless recognition. My body moved toward him, on its own. When the distance narrowed to 1 step, Leo hesitated for a moment, and then suddenly he lunged at my stomach, hugging me tightly. "Mommy," his voice broke. "I don't have to pretend I'm dead anymore." I covered his face with my hands, containing the sobs that burst from all the wounds I had suppressed for 2 years. I hugged him, as if letting go for a little bit would make him disappear again. His body was thin, but warm, alive. Detective Miller leaned slightly toward me. "Ma'am, we have to move the child to a safe place first, so the investigation can proceed." I nodded, still holding Leo. "Mommy's here." "Mommy's not leaving." After the children were evacuated, the police seized documents, lists, financial records, and illegal contracts with the hospital. And in the back room, a filing cabinet was found full of falsified documents of children who were supposedly dead but were never buried. One of them was Leo's document. I held my breath seeing it. The cause of death section was only filled in superficially, and the family consent section was signed twice by David. Attorney Davis gripped my arm. "With this, it's over for them." The investigation was carried out at the police station. One of the foundation employees finally broke down. She cried, her voice trembling, but her sentences were clear. "I'm just the registrar. I just did what I was ordered to do." In Leo's case, it was classified as a special case. The father himself handed him over. The mother knew nothing. The doctor handled it. I covered my ears, but the voice still penetrated. Leo sat on my lap, holding my hand tightly, as if afraid I would disappear again. I kissed the top of his head, letting him feel the warmth he had lost for 2 years. Detective Miller came with news. "We've secured all the evidence, ma'am. The hospital, the foundation, the organization that moved the children, and Mr. Miller. The trial can proceed soon." I nodded, stroking Leo's hair. From the interrogation room next door, there was the sound of someone being forced to sit down. The sound of a chair scraping the voice of a man I knew, but which became sharper when he was afraid. David was brought in for questioning. The wave of emotions in my chest hit the wall of my soul that had been cracked. David held me when Leo was gone. David said he didn't want to see me shattered. David manipulated everything to make me seem unstable. And tonight the truth was just behind a thin wall. I looked at the door of the interrogation room. Leo gripped my clothes. "Mommy, that man can't take me again, right?" I kissed his forehead. "No, sweetie. Never again." Leo nodded slowly, as if he could only believe it after hearing it directly from my lips. And when I turned my gaze, I saw David through the glass of the interrogation room, forced to sit, his face stiff and his hands cuffed. For the first time, he looked like a human who had lost control of his own lie. And my heart, which had been filled with pain, longing, and alienation for 2 years, finally whispered, "Now it's your turn, David. Everything you buried will be unearthed to the very bottom." The day of the trial arrived like a dawn I had both awaited and feared. The morning sky seemed pale, as if holding its breath along with the dozens of people entering the courthouse. Reporters swarmed the front entrance, cameras flashing, microphones pointed like spears seeking first blood. But today, I wasn't the one who had to hide. Today, the truth would sit on the witness stand, and the lie would sit in the defendant's chair. I held Leo's hand as we entered the waiting room. He was clean, his hair was short, and his cheeks had begun to fill out after a few days in a safe place. But his eyes still held a long trauma that wouldn't disappear easily. "Mommy, will he be there later?" he asked in a low voice. I knelt, so our faces were level. "Yes, sweetie. But you're safe. He can't take you again. Ever." Leo nodded, but I could see the thin fear that still lived behind his gaze, a fear that had been instilled in him for 2 years. A fear that could only disappear when justice truly stopped the steps of the people who had stolen his life. Detective Miller appeared behind the door. "It's time." The courtroom was full but cold. David sat at the defendant's table. His face was pale, but he still tried to look stoic. Dr. Evans was next to him, and several Foundation officials sat in a row. They all had ashen faces. The prosecutor began the trial with a resonant voice as the evidence was presented. "We are here with evidence of the simulation of a child's death, forgery of documents, illegal receipt of insurance payments, and participation in a child exploitation ring." David straightened his shoulders, trying to appear unshakable, but his gaze toward me was no longer that of a husband who knows his wife. It was a look filled with fear and hatred, because his lie had been unearthed. The recording of our conversation was played. David's voice filled the room. "That money is all invested in the business. People will say, 'You're unstable. If I hadn't moved quickly, you'd be getting treated for being crazy right now.'" Every word was like a stone hitting his face. And the hospital's CCTV video was played. David entering Dr. Evans's office, the woman from the foundation arriving with documents, the small gurney covered with a blanket being wheeled out the side door. The room erupted in murmurs. David closed his eyes, his face rigid. Dr. Evans tried to excuse himself. But the judge cut him off. "The video does not lie," and a foundation employee nearly sobbing testified with a trembling voice collapsing the remaining defense. In the internal records, Leo Miller was never registered as a corpse. He was immediately transferred for the identity change procedure. His father personally handed him over with his signature. I could barely breathe. And then the judge called the name I had only been able to call in prayer for 2 years. "Leo Miller, please come forward with the child psychologist." I held Leo's hand as we walked to the witness stand. He sat on my lap, his body small but warm. And for a moment, I forgot the room was full of people. I only felt the beat of our 2 hearts. The psychologist asked gently, "Leo, do you remember where you lived before?" "At home with Mommy," he answered weakly. "And what happened after that?" He bit his lip, his face stiff, but he tried to keep talking. "Dad said if I slept for a long time, Dad could pay the debt. And then I woke up in a white place that smelled like medicine. And then the people said I was dead. I had to be Nico. I wasn't supposed to say I had a mommy." The people in the room fell silent. It felt as if all the air in the room had been sucked out. I hugged him tightly, letting my tears fall silently on his hair. David stood up, shouting from the defendant's box, his face red. "It's a lie. That child is saying what he was told to say." The judge banged the gavel hard. "The defendant will be silent." But Leo, the little boy who was forced to disappear for 2 years, looked at David with a gaze far older than his years. "I'm scared of him. I don't want to sleep for a long time anymore." His words were simple, but they shattered all of David's defenses like fragile glass. After that, everything seemed to move quickly. The judge banged the gavel and read the preliminary verdict: remand in custody for David Dr. Evans and the Foundation officials. The sentences would be determined through further legal proceedings, but the evidence was already overwhelming. The sentence wasn't what was important to me. The most important thing was that Leo was no longer in their clutches. The following weeks passed like a new life that felt strange. My house was now filled with Leo's small footsteps again. His laughter hadn't fully returned, but he was starting to believe he was safe. The divorce proceedings moved quickly. Thanks to all the evidence, the court granted me full custody. Even part of David's assets were seized to compensate for the damage he had caused Leo and me. The house, my father's inheritance, became the place where we started over. Every morning, Leo would sit and draw at the table. Every night, I would read him a story before he slept, so he would know the world wasn't always dark. 2 months after the case was closed, I was standing in front of a new building with a sign that made my eyes moisten. The Homecoming Foundation, supported entirely by the rest of my father's inheritance. Next to me, Attorney Davis patted my shoulder. "It's a good start, Sarah. You didn't just survive, you changed." Detective Miller approached with a new file. "There are other cases of missing children. I need a mother's point of view." Leo was running in the yard in new clothes he had chosen himself. His hair blew in the wind, and his steps were finally light, like a boy who had become a child again. He ran up to me and tugged on my clothes just as he used to. "Mommy, if there's a lost kid later, tell them not to be scared to come home, okay?" I lifted him up and hugged him tightly. "Yes, sweetie. We'll help those kids come home." The afternoon wind stirred the small flags in front of the foundation building. The whole world seemed to sigh in relief. The circle of pain had finally closed. The circle of hope was beginning to open. And I, a mother who had lost everything 2 years ago, was standing here with eyes that no longer saw only darkness but a future I could hold again with my own 2 hands. Because in the end, the truth always comes home, and a mother's love always finds its way back. Come on, Leo. Now it's our turn to go find other children.